Why was everyone ignoring her at the briefing table? MARISA Rivera sat near the end, her wire-rimmed glasses catching the glare of the overhead lights, the hum of conversation rolling over her like wind through tall grass. She didn't mind being invisible. She'd built an entire life out of it. But that morning, as the tension in Camp Steel thickened like a storm front, she could feel something shifting in the air. The others laughed, shared inside jokes, compared coffee, and whispered guesses about why they'd all been called here. She just listened, observed, waited. Her hand rested lightly on a worn notebook, the same one she carried everywhere. To the rest of them, she was the clerk, the quiet one who handled requisitions, transport schedules, and personnel files. The woman who never raised her voice, never took sides, never spoke unless spoken to. To her, the job was safety, predictable, a way to silence the echoes of the life she'd left behind, the one that still found her sometimes in dreams when she woke sweating at 3 a.m. Outside the conference room windows, dawn spilled over the compound. Trucks moved in neat lines. A drill sergeant's voice cracked through the crisp air, ordering recruits to the training field. The world moved on, oblivious to the storm that was about to start inside this quiet room. The door opened. Lieutenant Rodriguez entered first, posture straight, eyes sharp. "Attention on deck," he barked. Every conversation died instantly. General Brooks followed, his presence commanding even before he spoke. His uniform was immaculate, medals gleaming like small, deliberate reminders of wars fought and survived. His gray hair framed a face lined by decades of leadership and disappointment, two things that looked remarkably alike. Behind him came the figure everyone recognized before the name was even spoken. Master Sergeant Kine. 6'5", 260 pounds of muscle, reputation, and menace. His face was the kind that looked carved from stone, but it was the way he moved, deliberate, silent, efficient, that made soldiers straighten their backs when he passed. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. Marisa's pen paused mid-note. She'd heard stories about him. Everyone had. General Brooks spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice filled the space, calm yet weighty. "As some of you know, we're hosting an international delegation next week. They'll be evaluating our readiness and training methodology." He let the words hang. The air tightened. Even clerical staff knew what that meant: pressure, visibility. "One of the key demonstrations will involve hand-to-hand combat training," he continued. "Unfortunately, the officer scheduled to participate has been hospitalized with pneumonia." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marisa's heartbeat quickened without reason. Brooks's gaze swept the crowd. "I need a volunteer, someone to step in for the demonstration against Master Sergeant Kine." Silence. Not the polite kind, but the thick, suffocating kind that follows a question no one dares answer. Kine's eyes moved slowly across the faces in front of him, young, nervous soldiers pretending to study the table. Everyone knew the sergeant's reputation. He wasn't cruel, but he fought hard, real. When he trained you, it felt like survival. Marisa looked around. Every man in the room seemed to shrink into his chair. Even Alina, her office manager, whispered under her breath, "Not a chance." Brooks clasped his hands behind his back. "I need someone who won't embarrass this base in front of our guests." That was when she heard her own voice, calm, steady, clear. "Sir, I'll volunteer." The reaction was immediate. Dozens of heads turned. The air crackled with disbelief. Someone choked on their coffee. Alina's pen fell to the floor. General Brooks blinked, visibly thrown off. "Ms. Rivera," he checked his clipboard. "Personnel administration, correct?" "Yes, sir." Kine's lips curved, half amusement, half pity. "With all due respect, ma'am," he said, his voice deep enough to vibrate the table, "this isn't a light exercise. It's full combat demonstration. No scripts." "I understand," she said. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was measured, controlled. That alone gave the general pause. "Are you certain, Staff Sergeant?" The title hung in the air. Few here ever used it for her. Fewer even realized she'd earned it long ago. "I am, sir," she replied. "I'll represent the base." Kine folded his arms, studying her. "You ever done any combat training before?" A faint smile touched her lips. "Once or twice." A low chuckle rolled through the room, half disbelief, half curiosity. But she didn't flinch, didn't even blink. The general exhaled, perhaps more intrigued than concerned now. "Very well. You'll have 4 days to prepare. The demonstration will be Friday at 1500 hours. As soon as he dismissed them, the room erupted into whispers. Alina rushed to her. "Marisa, what are you doing? That man could break you in half." Marisa adjusted her glasses. "He won't." "You can't be serious." But Marisa was already gathering her files, her expression unreadable. "It's fine, Alina. I'll handle it." She walked out before anyone could stop her. Her pulse was calm, her breathing steady, but inside something old stirred. By midday, the rumor had spread across Camp Steel like wildfire. The clerk volunteered. The woman from admin's going up against Kine. She's either brave or insane. In the cafeteria, soldiers whispered over trays. In the gym, instructors shook their heads. Even in the command office, officers exchanged uneasy glances. But Marisa ignored it all. She learned long ago that silence was a better shield than words. That night, long after the offices emptied and the fluorescent lights hummed in lonely corridors, she drove off base toward the small town nearby. Her headlights cut through mist curling off the asphalt, guiding her to an old, faded sign. "Wu's Dodging." She parked and sat for a moment, her hands resting on the steering wheel. She hadn't been here in years. The lights inside were dim, the air thick with incense and dust. A frail but steady voice greeted her before she even crossed the threshold. "You took your time coming back." She smiled softly. "I told you I was done with this, Master Wu." The old man emerged from the shadows, gray-haired but sharp-eyed. "And yet here you are." He studied her face, the faint scar just below her right ear, a relic from another life. "They asked for a volunteer." "Yes." "And you said yes." "I did." He nodded, unsurprised. "You always did have trouble staying invisible when it mattered most." She exhaled, setting her bag down. "I haven't trained properly in years." "Your body remembers," Wu said, turning toward the mats. "Your mind just needs reminding." For the next 2 hours, silence reigned except for the rhythmic sound of movement, bare feet striking mat, measured breaths, the whisper of fabric. The air filled with focus. Marisa's movements were slow at first, cautious. Her shoulder, once shattered during a mission overseas, protested each motion. But as she stretched, turned, and struck, something returned. Something she'd buried under years of paperwork and routine. Discipline, flow, precision. Wu watched from the edge, nodding occasionally. "You never lost it," he murmured. "You just stopped needing it." By the time she left, the stars had replaced the sun, and her muscles trembled with exhaustion, not pain but memory. When she returned to base, she sat in her car for several minutes, watching the dark silhouettes of hangars and barracks. Her reflection in the windshield looked like a stranger, calm eyes, steady breath, quiet resolve. Inside her chest, fear whispered, not of Kine, but of what waking that old part of herself might mean. She'd spent years trying to forget, but maybe, she thought, some parts of us aren't meant to stay buried. The next morning, she walked through the corridors of Camp Steel, and everything felt different. Where once she'd passed unseen, now eyes followed her. Some with amusement, some with concern, some with open admiration. Soldiers nodded awkwardly as she walked by, as if unsure whether to salute or apologize. "RIVERA," someone muttered as she passed the training yard. "She's the one going up against Kine." "Poor thing." "Or maybe not," another replied. You seen the way she walks, balanced, controlled. Rumors twisted truth faster than any report she'd ever typed, but she said nothing. Let them talk, let them wonder. Because for the first time in 4 years, Marisa Rivera felt something she hadn't in a long time: purpose. That night, as she stretched on her living room floor, the ache in her shoulder burned like an old scar trying to remind her of its existence. She rolled it carefully, the sound of rain tapping against her window. Her eyes drifted to the small wooden box on her bookshelf, the one she hadn't opened since her discharge. Inside were the fragments of another life: a tarnished Special Forces badge, a folded unit patch, a photo of her squad taken somewhere overseas, faces of people who hadn't all made it back. She ran her fingers over the badge. That was the last time she'd been called soldier. Friday was coming, and this time she wouldn't hide behind a desk. Because sometimes dignity doesn't need an audience, it just needs a reason to stand. Why did the colonel have her file on his desk? That question haunted Marisa all morning. She'd been summoned without explanation, no formal memo, no chain of command, just a message left on her monitor: report to Colonel Hayes at 900. By now, the entire base was alive with the rumor of her upcoming match. Even the cooks in the mess hall were taking bets. The quiet clerk had become Camp Steele's favorite mystery overnight. When she knocked on the colonel's office door, a sharp voice answered, "Enter." Colonel Alexandra Hayes was one of the few people Marisa genuinely respected. Sharp-minded, controlled, fair. She had the kind of gaze that made people tell the truth even when they didn't want to. Her uniform was crisp, her desk immaculate, except for one thing. Marisa's personnel file lay open in the center. "Staff Sergeant Rivera," the colonel began, not looking up right away. "Have a seat." Marisa obeyed, posture perfect. Hayes flipped a page, her voice calm but deliberate. "You volunteered to fight Master Sergeant Kine. I've read the reports." "Yes, ma'am." "I've also reviewed your file," Hayes continued, tapping the folder. "It's interesting reading." A pause. 10 years in Special Forces, advanced combat certifications, commendations for valor, and then she turned another page. A shoulder injury, discharge, administrative reassignment, silence for 4 years. Marisa didn't move, didn't blink. "Why didn't you mention any of this when you volunteered?" Marisa's voice was soft but steady. "Because it doesn't matter anymore, ma'am. I'm here as a clerk." The colonel leaned back in her chair, studying her. "That's the thing, Rivera. People like you don't stop being soldiers. You just get better at pretending." For a moment, the room fell quiet, except for the distant echo of marching boots outside. Hayes closed the file slowly. "You understand what's happening out there, don't you? Half the base thinks you're suicidal. The other half thinks you've lost your mind." "I've heard," Marisa said, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And yet you don't seem concerned." Marisa met her eyes. "With respect, ma'am, I've faced worse." Hayes studied her a moment longer, then nodded. "Very well, I won't interfere, but be aware, your performance Friday isn't just about you anymore. People are watching, and whether you win or lose, this base will remember." "Yes, ma'am." As Marisa rose to leave, Hayes added, "One more thing, Rivera." She stopped at the door. "You've been hiding in the quiet for years. Don't forget, some silence is earned, but some is just fear wearing discipline's uniform." Marisa didn't answer. She just gave a small nod and stepped into the corridor. By afternoon, the air on base felt electric. Word spread fast that Colonel Hayes had pulled her file. Soldiers whispered theories. Some said Marisa was an undercover operative. Others claimed she'd been part of a classified mission gone wrong. The truth was stranger and far simpler. She'd been tired. Tired of funerals. Tired of the weight of leadership. Tired of being the one others depended on to come home alive. She traded adrenaline for routine. And now fate, or perhaps guilt, had pulled her back into the light. That evening, she returned to Master Wu's dojo. The wooden floors creaked beneath her boots, the scent of cedar and sweat familiar as memory. "You came back," Wu said, smiling. "I didn't forget your words," she replied. "The body remembers." He gestured toward the mats. "Then let's remind it." She trained for hours, strikes, blocks, rolls, the fluid discipline that used precision instead of strength. Kine was a powerhouse, a tank. She couldn't outmuscle him. She didn't need to. Her advantage was control, timing, calm. Between drills, Wu watched her quietly. "Why this fight?" he asked. "You left that world behind." Marisa paused mid-stretch. "Because the world I left still lives in me, and maybe it's time I stop running from it." Wu nodded. "Then stop fighting to forget. Fight to remember who you were." Thursday came too quickly. By now, the entire base was watching her every move. Every corridor felt like a stage. Some soldiers saluted her as she passed, unsure whether to treat her like a hero or a myth. In the break room, Alina thrust a tablet toward her. "You've gone viral. Someone leaked footage from a training session last year, you running the obstacle course for fun. People are saying you're ex-special forces." Marisa's eyes flicked to the screen, then away. Rumors spread fast. "So it's true," Alina whispered. Marisa smiled faintly. "Let's just say I've done my share of paperwork under pressure." Alina exhaled. "You could have told us." "I didn't want to be treated differently." "Too late for that," Alina muttered. Later that day, while reviewing requisition forms, Marisa caught her reflection in the computer screen, composed, still, detached. The same expression she'd worn before every mission, but something about seeing it again unnerved her. She hadn't realized how much she'd missed that edge, how it made her feel alive. That night she drove again to the dojo, rain streaking across her windshield like tracer fire. Inside, Master Wu was already waiting. He held out a length of black cloth. "Wrap your hands." She hesitated. "It's been a long time." "Then you'll appreciate how it feels." The fabric slid between her fingers, rough and familiar. The smell of chalk and wood filled her lungs. As she tightened the wrap, her mind stilled. The past and present blurred into one. She sparred against an unseen enemy, moving in silence, her body remembering rhythm and momentum. Strike, pivot, breathe. When she finished, Wu nodded approvingly. "You've stopped fighting like someone who's afraid to hurt." She looked at him. "And you?" He smiled faintly. "I stopped underestimating you the day you first walked in here, broken but not defeated." She bowed lightly. "Thank you, Master." "Remember," he said as she turned to leave, "your greatest strength isn't what you hit. It's what you choose not to." Friday morning arrived cold and clear. The compound hummed with anticipation. International observers were already setting up near the training arena, their cameras and notepads ready. The American flag stirred above them in the wind. Soldiers gathered along the perimeter fence, whispering, pointing, waiting. In the locker room, Marisa sat alone on the bench, lacing her boots slowly. Her reflection stared back from a small cracked mirror, hair pulled tight, eyes calm. The door opened behind her. Kine stepped in, massive as ever, his presence filling the room like thunder. "So it's true," he said. "You're special forces." Marisa didn't answer right away. "That depends on who you ask." He grunted. "Colonel told me enough. Didn't expect that from someone who files supply orders." "People don't expect a lot of things," she replied. He studied her. "You could have told us. Would have saved me some embarrassment." "This isn't about you or me," she said softly. "It's about showing them what discipline looks like." For a moment Kine's expression softened, respect, maybe even curiosity. "You ready?" She stood meeting his eyes. "Always." Outside the crowd waited. General Brooks addressed the observers with his usual command. "Ladies and gentlemen, today's demonstration will display our base's standard for close-quarters combat. All moves are controlled. Safety protocols are in place." He looked toward Marisa and Kine. "Proceed." The two stepped onto the mat. Silence fell like a held breath. Kine towered over her, a wall of muscle and intimidation. Marisa looked small beside him, composed, unarmed, her expression unreadable. Kine smirked slightly. "Don't hold back," he murmured. "I wasn't planning to." They bowed. And then the world seemed to pause. For those watching, it began as expected. Kine lunged forward, a powerful strike meant to test her reflexes. But what followed happened too fast for most eyes to track. Marisa pivoted, redirecting his momentum with surgical precision. The giant stumbled, regained footing, came again harder. She slipped past each blow, her movements fluid, quiet, efficient. It wasn't strength against strength, it was patience against force. Within seconds, the energy of the crowd shifted. What they thought would be a humiliation became something else entirely. Whispers rose, someone gasped, cameras clicked. Kine attacked again, sweeping low, feinting high. Marisa countered, ducked, and in one seamless motion turned his strike into a controlled takedown that ended with him flat on his back, her knee poised over his chest. But she didn't strike. She stopped, breathing steady. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the room erupted in applause. Kine blinked, stunned, and then laughed, deep and genuine. "You've been hiding, Sergeant," he said, taking her offered hand to stand. She smiled faintly, maybe just resting. General Brooks's expression was unreadable, a mix of pride and disbelief. The international observers were already scribbling notes. For the first time in years, Marisa felt the strange calm that used to come after victory, not triumph but release. As the crowd cheered, she caught sight of Alina and a few office colleagues in the back. Their faces were filled with awe, confusion, and something else, respect. For the first time, they saw her not as the quiet woman behind the desk, but as someone who'd chosen silence, not weakness. And in that moment, as the adrenaline faded and the noise blurred, she realized something she hadn't in years. She hadn't lost herself after all. She'd just been waiting for the right reason to return. Why wasn't she celebrating? The bass was still buzzing the next morning. The match had ended nearly 24 hours ago, but Camp Steel hadn't stopped talking since. Every corridor echoed with fragments of disbelief. Soldiers who hadn't even been in the room now claimed they had seen it with their own eyes. The story had already grown larger than truth. The clerk didn't just win. She dismantled him. She moved like she'd done it 1,000 times before. Marisa sat quietly in the cafeteria, stirring a cup of coffee that had gone cold 15 minutes ago. The hum of conversation surrounded her, but she wasn't really listening. She didn't like the attention. Victory had never been her drug, it had been her burden. Because winning meant someone else lost. And sometimes, in her old life, that loss came with consequences far heavier than applause. "Mind if I sit?" She looked up. Master Sergeant Kine stood beside her tray, holding a mug the size of a grenade. She gestured to the empty seat. "You earned it." He sat down, the chair creaking under his weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sound of forks on plates filled the silence between them. Finally, Kine chuckled. "You made me look bad out there, Rivera." "You made yourself look honest," she replied. He raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be a compliment." "It is," she said softly. "You didn't hold back, that's why it mattered." He nodded slowly. "You could have flattened me in the first 30 seconds, couldn't you?" She smiled faintly. "That wasn't the point." Kine leaned back, studying her like he was seeing her for the first time. "You ever think about getting back in uniform? Real combat, I mean. We could use people like you." She looked down at her untouched coffee. "I've seen enough combat for a lifetime." "Fair," he said after a beat. "But I gotta tell you, whatever you did yesterday, you reminded a lot of these kids what quiet strength looks like. Half the base has been walking taller since." Marisa's lips twitched into the smallest smile. Then maybe it was worth it. When he left, she exhaled slowly, as if she'd been holding her breath since the match began. Later that day, Colonel Hayes summoned her again. This time, there was no file on the desk, only a single manila envelope and a laptop, screen still glowing with a paused video of the demonstration. "Sit, Rivera." Marisa obeyed. The colonel clicked the spacebar. The screen replayed her fight from the day before, slow motion, camera angles from the observer's footage. Every movement precise, efficient, flawless. When it ended, Hayes turned the laptop toward her. "That's been circulating through the defense network since last night." Marisa frowned. "Already?" "Already," Hayes confirmed. "Word spread to the division command. They're asking questions." Marisa's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About you," Hayes said simply. "Your record, your discharge, your current role. Some people want to know how a paper clerk disarmed one of the Army's most decorated combat instructors in front of international observers." Marisa folded her hands in her lap, the motion calm but deliberate. "You could tell them the truth." Hayes leaned back in her chair. "And what truth is that?" "That I just did my job," Marisa replied quietly. "I represented this base with discipline, nothing more." The colonel smiled thinly. "You really think that's going to satisfy them?" Marisa looked up, eyes steady. "It has to." Hayes sighed. "You're not in trouble, Rivera, not yet, but I want you to be prepared. Once the higher-ups realize who you used to be, this won't stay small. Someone going to come looking." Marisa nodded once, understood. Hayes studied her a moment longer. "Tell me something. Why did you stop? Special Forces doesn't let go of people like you easily." For a moment, Marisa didn't answer. Her gaze drifted toward the small American flag pinned above the colonel's desk. "Because every mission took something," she said finally. "Something I couldn't get back, a friend, a piece of myself. I thought if I stopped fighting, maybe I could start living." The colonel nodded slowly, expression unreadable. "And now?" "Now," Marisa said softly, "I'm not sure if living without purpose is any different from dying quietly." That answer hung in the air like smoke. Hayes exhaled. "You're dismissed, Sergeant, and Rivera, try to stay out of headlines for at least 24 hours." Marisa smiled faintly. "No promises, ma'am." By evening, the video had reached places even the colonel couldn't track. Defense newsletters, private military forums, even civilian networks that covered human interest, military stories. The narrative had already been written without her input. A forgotten soldier, a silent legend, the clerk who humbled a master sergeant. She hated it. Not because it was untrue, but because it wasn't the part that mattered. The real story wasn't about winning. It was about why she'd ever needed to fight at all. When she returned to her small apartment that night, she found a message blinking on her phone. No number, just an old code she hadn't seen in years, the kind only used by her former unit. Her pulse stilled. She played it. A man's voice came through the static, deep, gravelly, familiar. "Rivera, it's Mason. If this message reaches you, it means we've got eyes on your video. Didn't expect to see you surface like that. Some of us, we never forgot." Silence. "Then you might want to be careful. When ghosts come back to life, someone usually notices. Call if you need a friend." The line clicked off. Marisa stood there for a long moment, the phone heavy in her hand. She hadn't heard Mason's voice since her discharge, since the mission that ended everything. The memories clawed at her mind before she could stop them. A desert night, gunfire, a burning vehicle. The moment she dragged two wounded teammates through sand and smoke, the pain in her shoulder exploding with every step. The screaming, the silence after. She set the phone down and stared at the wall until the room blurred. Some wounds never healed, they just stopped bleeding. Saturday morning came with an unusual quiet. The usual base energy, morning runs, loud sergeants, early drills, seemed to pause whenever she walked by. She could feel it, respect mixed with curiosity, awe tangled with unease. Some saluted her, others just nodded silently. But not everyone approved. "Must be nice," one young corporal muttered behind her back, "getting famous for one lucky match." Marisa didn't turn, didn't need to. Respect wasn't earned by shouting, it was earned by restraint. Later that day, she found herself in the training yard again. Empty now, the mats still faintly marked from yesterday's match. She stood in the center, eyes closed, breathing steady. Her shoulder ached, but the pain felt like an old friend, honest, grounding. "Thought I'd find you here," Kine's voice called. She opened her eyes as he approached, carrying 2 water bottles. He tossed one to her. "You move like someone who can't sit still." "Habit," she said, catching the bottle. "Yeah, that's the curse, isn't it?" Kine said, taking a long drink. "We train to fight, then spend the rest of our lives trying not to." She gave a small laugh, something like that. He studied her for a moment. "You ever miss it? The fight? The purpose?" She thought about it, the question heavier than it sounded. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but only the parts that made sense. The moments between chaos, when you knew what you were protecting, when you believed it mattered." Kine nodded. "And now?" "Now I protect order," she said simply. "Paperwork, schedules, structure. It's quieter, but it's still service." He grinned. "You're a strange one, Rivera." "Maybe," she said softly. "Or maybe I just learned that not every battle is loud." Kine chuckled, shaking his head. "You're wasted behind a desk." "Maybe," she repeated, but there was something unreadable in her tone, part melancholy, part peace. They stood in silence for a while, 2 soldiers on different paths, bound by the same understanding, that war never really ends. It just changes shape. As Kine turned to leave, he paused. "You know, the general's talking about recommending you for reactivation." Marisa froze. "Reactivation?" "Not full deployment," he clarified. "Instruction, training, the kind of work where you teach the next generation how to do what you did yesterday without killing themselves in the process." She didn't respond. He smiled faintly. "Think about it, you'd be good at it." When he left, she stood alone again. The wind rustled across the field, carrying the faint echo of laughter from the distant barracks. She looked down at her hands, strong, steady, callous despite the years behind a keyboard. She wasn't sure what scared her more, that she'd be asked to return, or that part of her wanted to. That night, as the sun bled across the horizon, Marisa sat by her window, watching the world fade to amber and gray. She replayed the colonel's words in her mind, Kine's, Mason's. Every one of them pulled her closer to a past she wasn't sure she could face again. She reached for the small wooden box on her table, the one she hadn't opened since before the match. Inside lay her old dog tags, dull and cold, edges worn smooth by time. She ran her thumb over the engraved name, RIVERA. She closed her eyes. Maybe the universe had a strange way of reminding her that purpose doesn't disappear. It just waits for us to stop hiding. She lifted the tags, let them dangle in the fading light, and whispered, "Maybe one last time." Why was the past suddenly calling her name again? Marisa stood outside Colonel Hayes's office, a sealed envelope in her hand and a knot in her stomach. The sun had barely risen, but the base already pulsed with the low hum of engines and orders. Soldiers moved with purpose. She used to move like that once, before life slowed her down, before the quiet became her armor. "Come in," Hayes's voice called from behind the door. Marisa stepped inside. The colonel was on the phone, but her eyes flicked up briefly, acknowledging her presence with a nod. Papers covered the desk, folders marked confidential, video stills from the demonstration, and what looked like a memo stamped with the Pentagon's crest. Hayes finished her call, then gestured to the chair opposite. "You've started something, Rivera." Marisa set the envelope on the desk. That wasn't my intention. Intent doesn't change impact, Hayes replied, opening the envelope. Inside were her updated evaluation forms, clean, efficient, perfectly in order. You've been requested by Division Command to report for a capability assessment. Marisa blinked. Assessment for what purpose? To determine if your previous training can be reactivated, Hayes said matter-of-factly. They're short-staffed in the Advanced Combatives program. Your demonstration made waves. People are asking if you're still operational. Marisa almost laughed. Operational? I'm an administrator, ma'am. The colonel folded her arms. You're a soldier who stopped admitting it. There's a difference. Silence hung in the air. Hayes continued, her voice softer now. This isn't an order, Rivera. Not yet. But if they send one, I won't be able to shield you. Think about it. Marisa hesitated, eyes dropping to the papers. If I say no. Then you stay where you are, Hayes said. You'll keep your desk, your reports, your peace. But the system doesn't forget excellence. Someone will come knocking again. Marisa nodded slowly, understood. As she stood to leave, Hayes added quietly, sometimes purpose finds us even when we're not looking. By afternoon, the whispers had returned. Rumor said Division Command was evaluating her for a special training role. Some said instructor, others said field advisor. Theories bloomed like weeds. Marisa tried to drown them out, losing herself in spreadsheets and supply lists. But every so often her cursor froze, her thoughts drifting toward something she'd buried deep, that last mission. The one that broke her. She hadn't spoken about it in years, not even to her therapist during her medical discharge review. There were parts of that day she'd locked away so tightly that even memories avoided them. But ghosts are patient, they wait. That evening, she went back to Master Wu's dojo. The old man was sweeping the floor when she entered. You have that look again, he said without turning. What look? The one soldiers get before they're sent somewhere they swore they'd never go back to. She smiled faintly. Division Command called. They want to assess my capabilities. Wu leaned the broom against the wall. And you're wondering if you still have any to show them. She nodded. I've spent 4 years convincing myself I was done, that what happened back then was enough. Wu walked to her slowly, his eyes kind but sharp. You can leave the battlefield, Marisa, but the battle doesn't always leave you. He pointed to the mat. Show me what's left. They trained in silence, no instruction, no hesitation, just rhythm, strike, block, move. Every motion carried memory. Sweat stung her eyes, breath deepened, muscles screamed. When she finally stopped, chest heaving, Wu said, You're not broken, you're restrained. Marisa dropped to one knee, catching her breath. Maybe that's better than what I used to be. Wu knelt beside her. You confuse control with surrender. She looked up at him, her eyes tired but alive. And what if I'm afraid that being who I was will destroy who I've become? Then find a way to be both, he said simply. That's what wisdom is. 2 days later, Marisa found herself inside the training complex's restricted section, a place she hadn't entered since before her injury. The smell hit her first, rubber mats, metal weights, disinfectant, and sweat. It was the scent of her old life. Waiting for her was Major Ellis, head of Advanced Combatives Instruction. His reputation preceded him, tough, pragmatic, but fair. Staff Sergeant Rivera, he greeted, extending a hand. Heard you surprised a few people last week. She shook his hand. Just doing my part, sir. He smirked. That's what they all say before the paperwork doubles. They began the assessment quietly, hand-to-hand sequences, endurance drills, reaction tests. Cameras recorded everything. Observers from Division Command stood behind glass, writing notes. By the end of the 3rd hour, sweat poured from her like rain. Her shoulder burned, her knuckles throbbed, but her rhythm never broke. When it was over, Ellis whistled. "You've still got it, Rivera. Hell, you move like you never left." She gave a small smile. Leaving was easier than coming back. He laughed. "That's the truth." Then his tone shifted. "Command, offering you a transfer. Instructor program, combatives and tactical defense. You train recruits and special ops candidates. It's a high honor." Marisa blinked. "You're serious?" "Completely," Ellis said. "Colonel Hayes approved it already. The final decision's yours." That night, Marisa walked the perimeter of Camp Steel alone. The base lights glowed against the dusk, cutting through mist like search beams in memory. Each step felt heavier than the last. A transfer, instructor status, a return to the uniformed world she deliberately left behind. She thought of Kine, of his laughter after their fight, of Colonel Hayes's quiet respect, of Master Wu's words, "Find a way to be both." Maybe the universe was giving her a second chance, or maybe it was testing if she'd learned anything at all. Halfway around the perimeter, she stopped at the memorial wall, a long slab of granite etched with names of soldiers who'd trained, served, or died under Camp Steel's banner. Her eyes found one name in particular, SGT, Mason Clark. She froze. The message she'd received days ago replayed in her mind, his voice through static, warning her to be careful. She had assumed he was alive. Her hand trembled as she reached out to touch the engraving. Mason Clark, KIA, Operation Iron Dusk. The same mission she'd survived. Her breath caught. She remembered the blast, the screams, the fire, the moment she dragged him out of the truck, his blood soaking into her sleeve as he'd said, "Don't stop, Rivera." She had carried him half a mile before the medevac arrived. He hadn't made it through the night. So who had sent the message? Her heart pounded. The memory was too vivid, the voice too real. Maybe someone from the old unit had used his name, or maybe she didn't want to think about the other possibility. She stepped back from the wall, her reflection faintly visible in the polished stone. Two versions of herself stared back, the soldier and the clerk. And for the first time, she wasn't sure which one she trusted. Back at her quarters, she sat at her desk, the transfer form open on her laptop. Just a single signature stood between her and the life she'd sworn off. Her phone buzzed again, unknown number. No voicemail this time, just a text. "Iron Dusk wasn't what they told you. Don't sign anything yet." Her blood ran cold. She stared at the message, then typed back carefully. "Who is this?" The response came seconds later. "Someone who remembers. Check your personnel file tomorrow, you'll understand." She dropped the phone onto the desk, staring at it like it might detonate. The quiet room suddenly felt too small, too still. After a long minute, she stood and walked to the window. Outside, the training grounds glowed under floodlights. Soldiers jogged the perimeter, their voices echoing faintly. Life moved on. It always did. But for her, something had stopped. She pressed a hand against the glass, the cool surface grounding her. Maybe coming back had never been about teaching or redemption. Maybe it was about finding the truth she'd been too scared to face. Some part of her past wasn't finished. And if the dead were speaking again, then silence was no longer an option. The next morning, she walked into the administrative office as if nothing had changed. But inside, every nerve buzzed. She logged into her workstation, pulled up her personnel records, the same file she'd seen countless times. Except now, one section was missing. Her service summary, the one detailing Operation Iron Dusk. It had been wiped. In its place, classified, access restricted by order of division command. Her heart thudded. The only people who could authorize that level of restriction were upper intelligence officials or senior commanders. Whatever had happened in that desert years ago, it wasn't buried. It had been buried deliberately. And someone didn't want her digging. That night, as she sat in the dark of her room, Her laptop screen cast a pale glow across her face. The unsigned transfer form waited in her inbox, cursor blinking like a heartbeat. She hovered her finger over the touchpad. Accept the transfer, and she'd be back inside the system, closer to answers, closer to the truth. Decline it, and the silence would swallow everything again. She closed her eyes. The faces of her old team flickered behind her lids, Mason, Diaz, Cooper, gone but not forgotten. Her whisper barely filled the room. If you're still out there, I'll find out why. Then she signed. Why did it feel like she was being watched again? MARISA Rivera adjusted the collar of her newly issued combat uniform, the faint stiffness of fresh fabric unfamiliar after years behind a desk. The mirror in the locker room reflected a version of herself she thought she'd buried, the soldier, not the clerk. She traced the subdued patch on her shoulder, Instructor Corps. It wasn't a deployment order, not yet, but it was close enough. The transfer had gone through faster than expected. Within 48 hours of signing, she'd been reassigned to the combatives program as a senior training consultant. Colonel Hayes called it a well-deserved return. MARISA called it a test disguised as opportunity. And deep down, she knew it wasn't just about her skills. Someone wanted her inside again. The air in the training hall was thick with the sound of impact. Gloves on pads, boots on mats, instructors shouting over grunts of effort. Rows of young recruits practiced drills under the watchful eyes of junior sergeants. When she stepped inside, the noise dimmed. Major Ellis spotted her first. Ah, our new celebrity. MARISA gave a polite nod. Just here to work, sir. Good, he said, gesturing toward the mats. We've got a group from Recon Division for advanced close quarters training. They'll keep you sharp. As she walked onto the mat, the recruits straightened, eyes wide. They'd seen the footage. Everyone had. She smiled faintly. Relax, I'm not here to embarrass anyone. A few nervous chuckles broke the tension. Pair up, she ordered, voice firm but calm. Let's see what you know. They moved, awkward at first, then better. She corrected stances, adjusted timing, broke down technique until precision replaced panic. Within an hour, the room hummed with focus. Ellis watched from the corner, impressed. You sure you haven't been doing this for the last decade? Only in my head, she said. But beneath the surface, her thoughts weren't on the recruits. They were on the text message, the erased file, and the one word that refused to leave her mind, Iron Dusk. That night, long after the others had gone, MARISA stayed behind. The gym lights buzzed overhead, the mats cool beneath her bare feet. She moved through the motions slowly, strike, pivot, counter, until muscle memory took over. Then she stopped, staring at the wall where old photographs of instructors lined the corridor. One frame caught her attention, a grainy group photo of a Special Forces team dated 8 years prior. She leaned closer. There, second from the left, Mason Clerk. Alive. Her breath hitched. The caption beneath the photo listed him as Instructor, Advanced Operations Division. Not KIA. Her pulse quickened. Someone had faked the record, or someone had faked the death. Either way, she needed answers. The next morning, she requested access to the base archives, citing curriculum research. It was a partial truth. The clerk on duty, a young specialist, scanned her badge. Access granted, Sergeant. You'll need clearance code for restricted files, though. She smiled. Don't worry, I know which ones I'm cleared for. The archives were cold, dimly lit, endless rows of metal shelves and labeled boxes. She found the file cabinets marked classified operations, redacted, and stopped. Her heart pounded. She typed her old clearance ID into the terminal, one she hadn't used in years. Access DNID. She tried again, this time adding the override code she still remembered from her Special Forces days. Access granted. The folder she sought appeared on screen. Operation Iron Dusk, personnel roster. She opened it. Her name appeared third, Mason Clark's fifth, next to his status, active REDACTED location. A chill crawled down her spine. Someone had gone through great lengths to erase him publicly while keeping him operational behind the curtain. But why contact her now? Why warn her? She scrolled further and froze at the next line. Commanding Officer, Colonel Alexandra Hayes. Her breath caught. Hayes had led the mission, the same woman who'd told her to think about it when the transfer came. The weight of realization hit hard. Maybe the colonel hadn't just been watching over her. Maybe she'd been managing her return. Her mind raced through possibilities, cover-ups, black ops, classified survivors, but none of it explained why now. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. She closed the file instantly, heart pounding, switching the monitor to a random logistics page. A shadow appeared in the doorway. Couldn't sleep. It was Hayes. Marisa forced a calm smile, just catching up on training history. Hayes stepped closer, hands clasped behind her back. You always did have trouble staying idle. I like to stay informed. The colonel's eyes held hers for a long, heavy second. Careful where you look, Rivera. Some doors only open once. Then she turned and left. Marisa stood frozen, pulse roaring in her ears. The meaning was clear, Hayes knew. And if she knew, then the message Marisa had received wasn't from Mason by accident. It was bait. That night she couldn't sleep. Every sound outside her quarters, a distant bootstep, a radio click, the wind against the glass, felt amplified, intrusive. At 200 hours she got up, dressed quietly, and stepped out into the corridor. The base was half asleep, lights dimmed to red for night ops mode. She walked without purpose at first, but her instincts guided her toward the training complex again. Old habits died hard. When she entered the gym, it was empty, or so she thought. A figure stood in the shadows, waiting. I was wondering when you'd come looking, a voice said. She froze. The man stepped forward, older, scarred, but unmistakably alive. Mason Clark. Her breath caught. You're supposed to be dead. He smiled faintly. That's what they wanted you to believe. She didn't move closer. Who, they, Mason? He looked around cautiously, lowering his voice. The operation didn't end when you left, Marisa. Iron Dusk was never a mission, it was a prototype. She frowned. Prototype for what? For soldiers who could disappear, he said grimly. Operatives embedded in plain sight. People who could vanish from records but still exist for the jobs no one talks about. She stared at him, disbelief warring with dread. You're telling me you've been working off-grid for 8 years? Not by choice, he said. They buried me in the system, and now they're doing the same to you. Marisa's pulse raced. Hayes. He nodded. She ran the first phase. Iron Dusk was her design. She knew who to recruit, soldiers too skilled to lose but too damaged to keep. She shook her head slowly. That doesn't make sense. She's my commanding officer, She's your handler, Mason interrupted quietly. And she's been setting you up since the moment you volunteered. The words hit like a blow. Marisa stepped back. No, she gave me a choice. Mason's voice softened. They always make it look like choice. He reached into his jacket and slid a small drive across the floor toward her. Everything you need to see is on that. The files they wiped. The missions you never knew you were part of. Before she could respond, headlights cut across the windows. Mason turned sharply. They're tracking me. Who? He didn't answer, just grabbed her arm. Don't go to Hayes. Don't trust anyone. If I don't make contact in 72 hours, find the old range outside the perimeter, sector Delta 7. There's a safe house. Then he slipped out through the rear exit, vanishing into the dark. Marisa stood there, breath trembling, heart pounding in her chest. For years, she'd thought she'd escaped the chaos. Now she realized she'd just been sleeping inside it. She picked up the drive, cold metal against her palm, and looked toward the door where Mason had disappeared. If he was right, everything she believed about her discharge, about Hayes, about her peace, was a lie. And the only way to know the truth was to stop hiding. The next morning, Marisa entered the office as usual. Hayes greeted her with her usual composed smile, as if nothing had changed. But behind that calm, Marisa saw it now: calculation. "Sleep well?" Hayes asked. Marisa returned the smile, as well as can be expected. "Good," the colonel said, gathering her papers. "We've got a busy week ahead. The division wants updates on your training metrics." Marisa nodded. "Of course, ma'am." As she turned to leave, Hayes added casually, "Oh, and Rivera, stay focused on the job. Too much curiosity can be distracting." Marisa paused at the door, forcing her voice to remain even. "Understood, ma'am." She left the office, pulse quickening, the drive hidden in her jacket pocket. Whatever this was, it went deeper than she'd imagined. And for the first time since the day she'd volunteered, she understood. She hadn't stepped into a fight. She stepped into a trap. Why did the drive feel heavier than a weapon? Marisa Rivera sat alone in her quarters, the glow of her laptop faint against the midnight shadows. The base was quiet, the kind of silence that only came when everyone else was asleep or pretending to be. She stared at the small metallic drive Mason had given her. It looked ordinary, harmless, but every instinct screamed otherwise. The soldier in her wanted to destroy it. The clerk in her wanted to catalog it. The woman caught between them just wanted to know the truth. After a long breath, she inserted it into her computer. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a simple prompt appeared. "Enter access code." She frowned. "Of course," she muttered, "Mason wouldn't have made it easy." She tried a few obvious ones: her old unit number, the Iron Dusk date, Mason's ID. Nothing. Then she hesitated. She typed, "Don't RIVERA." The screen flickered. And then the files opened. The first document was a mission brief, familiar format, standard military classification header. But the content was anything but standard. Project Iron Dusk. Objective: development of embedded operatives program. Long-term civilian integration for inactive assets. Director: Call AHAYS. Field Supervisor: MAJMCLARKE. Marisa's pulse quickened. Mason wasn't just part of the mission, he'd been one of its architects. She scrolled further. There were reports, psychological evaluations, field profiles, names, dozens of names. Soldiers listed as discharged or deceased, but later marked active REDACTED location. They weren't dead, they'd been repurposed. Her own file was there too. RIVERA, MARISA. Status: active. Civilian cover, administrative staff, Camp Steel. Observation protocol. Subject BELIEVES, self in retirement phase. Do not interfere unless trigger occurs. Trigger initiated. Voluntary combat display. She read it twice before her mind caught up. They hadn't chosen her because of her skills. They'd placed her where she'd eventually choose herself. The volunteer moment, the demonstration, had been the switch they were waiting to flip. Her hand trembled as she scrolled further down. The final section contained encrypted audio logs. She clicked the first one. "She's not ready," Mason's voice said through static. "You're playing with something you don't understand." Then Hayes's voice, calm and cold. "She'll come back when she's meant to. They always do." The recording ended abruptly. Marisa closed her eyes, the sound of her heartbeat filling the room. They orchestrated it all: her retirement, her quiet job, her sudden return. Every piece of peace she'd built was nothing more than a stage. A rustle behind her made her spin. Nothing, just the wind pressing against the window. Still, she pulled the drive out and slipped it into her boot. Whatever this was, she couldn't trust her computer anymore. By morning, the unease had spread into every corner of her mind. She moved through her day like a ghost, training recruits, nodding through briefings, keeping her breathing measured. But every conversation felt loaded. Every glance lingered too long. Even Kine noticed. "You're distracted," he said during a sparring session. "Just tired," she lied. "You don't get tired," he said, eyes narrowing. "You get quiet, there's a difference." She forced a smile. "You sound like my old co." He grinned. "Smart person." "Maybe too smart," she murmured under her breath. When training ended, she excused herself early and walked toward the administrative wing. The corridor lights flickered. Maintenance had been spotty lately, but something about the rhythm felt deliberate, timed like surveillance. She reached her old office, where Alina sat typing. "Hey, stranger," Alina said, smiling. "Or should I say celebrity instructor?" "Don't start," Marisa replied with a half-smile. "You still have access to personnel records, right?" Alina tilted her head. "Technically, yes. Why?" "I need you to pull something for me. Operation Iron Dusk. Anything classified under that title." Alina blinked. "That's way above our clearance. You trying to get me fired?" Marisa softened her tone. "Just humor me. I need to know if it's still listed." Alina hesitated, then nodded. "Give me an hour." "Thank you," Marisa said, meaning it. She spent that hour in the old storage room behind the records wing, her unofficial hiding place when she'd been a clerk. The air smelled of dust and ink. She sat on a crate, staring at the drive in her palm. Was Mason still alive? Was Hayes tracking her? Or worse, were they working together again? Her thoughts fractured, jumping back to that desert night years ago, the heat, the explosion, Mason's blood on her hands. She'd blamed herself for losing him, but now she realized she'd been meant to lose him. The mission had never been about rescue. It had been about erasure. When Alina returned, she looked nervous. "Marisa, I don't know what you're into, but whatever it is, stop." "What did you find?" "Nothing," Alina said. "The system flagged the search the second I typed it. 2 minutes later, it locked me out. Someone's monitoring those files in real time." Marisa's pulse spiked. "Did they say anything?" "No, but 5 minutes later, Colonel Hayes showed up downstairs. She didn't see me, but—" Alina swallowed hard. She looked like she already knew someone went digging. Marisa exhaled slowly. "Thank you, Alina. You didn't see me today." "Marisa, please." Alina hesitated, then nodded and left. Marisa slipped out the back door and headed for the motor pool. The late afternoon sun burned low, casting long shadows across the base. She checked over her shoulder, no one directly following, but she knew surveillance didn't always wear a uniform. She needed distance, time, somewhere to think. There was only one place that fit that description. By nightfall, she'd driven 10 miles beyond the perimeter, dirt roads winding through barren hills, until the headlights caught a faded sign half swallowed by weeds. Sector Delta 7, a training range, D-COMMISSIONED. The same coordinates Mason had given her. The place was silent except for the soft ticking of cooling metal as she parked. The old range looked abandoned, collapsed fences, bullet-riddled targets, storage sheds leaning with time. She grabbed her flashlight and the drive, stepping into the darkness. Inside one of the sheds, a small light blinked faint, rhythmic. She approached cautiously. The light came from a laptop sitting on a workbench, battery-powered, already open. On the screen, a message. "Welcome back, RIVERA." Her breath caught. "Mason." A video file autoplayed. Mason appeared on screen, recorded days earlier. His face was tired, eyes bloodshot. "If you're seeing this, I didn't make it back. They're closing the project. Hayes thinks she can control the fallout, but she's wrong. Iron Dusk was never about training soldiers. It was about manufacturing loyalty, behavioral programming. They embedded psychological triggers into select operatives during debriefs. You, me, all of us. Her stomach turned cold. You were supposed to be dormant until activated. Volunteering against Kine, that wasn't coincidence. That was conditioning. You were programmed to step forward when you heard a command phrase. She froze. The phrase. She remembered the briefing that day before she volunteered. General Brooks's words. We need a volunteer to step in and represent our base with honor. Represent our base with honor. The phrase had triggered her compliance. Her choice hadn't been hers at all. The room spun. Mason continued. If Hayes knows you've broken conditioning, she'll try to recover you. That's their term for elimination. You need to disappear before that happens. The screen flickered, the video cut out. Marisa stood there, trembling, the truth sinking like lead into her veins. They hadn't given her a second chance. They reactivated her. The sound of an approaching engine broke the silence outside. Headlights swept across the dirt, growing brighter. Marisa slammed the laptop shut and ducked behind the shed window, peering out. A military SUV rolled to a stop near her car. Two figures stepped out, silhouettes unmistakable even in the dim light. Colonel Hayes and Master Sergeant Kine. Her stomach clenched. Hayes scanned the area, speaking into her radio. Target vehicle located. Proceed to secure the subject. Kine's voice followed, uncertain. Colonel, you sure about this? Rivera, not. She's compromised, Hayes snapped, and dangerous. Marisa's pulse thundered. She moved quietly, slipping out the back door of the shed and crouching low behind the ridge line. The ground was dry, gravel crunching under her boots with every step. Marisa, Hayes's voice called through the loudspeaker, sharp and echoing. Don't make this harder than it has to be. We just want to talk. She almost laughed. Talk, the same word they'd used years ago before disappearing half her team. She slid behind an old transport crate, pulling her sidearm from her holster. She hadn't drawn it in months, maybe years, but the grip still felt right. Kine's voice echoed again, closer now. Rivera, if you're out here, listen to me. This isn't what it looks like. Just come out. She hesitated. He sounded genuine. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he was a pawn too. But she couldn't risk it. Not yet. Hayes's voice grew colder. Last chance, Sergeant. Come quietly. Marisa exhaled slowly, finger resting near the trigger. Then she whispered to herself, not this time. And she moved. The night exploded into chaos, footsteps, shouted commands, the flash of floodlights cutting through dust. But Marisa was gone before they reached the shed, vanishing into the ravine that stretched toward the forest. She didn't stop until the base lights were distant stars behind her. Somewhere out there, Mason's truth waited, and maybe the remnants of Iron Dusk still lived in the shadows. She'd find them. Not as their experiment. Not as their weapon. But as herself. Because for the first time in years, she wasn't running from who she'd been. She was running toward what she was meant to finish. Where do you go when every road leads back to the people hunting you? The desert wind clawed across the hillside as Marisa Rivera crouched behind a crumbling wall, catching her breath. The moon hung low, white and pitiless, washing the rocks in silver light. She'd been moving for hours, following no map, guided only by instinct and the faint memory of routes she'd once used for field exfiltration. Behind her, the lights of Camp Steel shimmered faintly on the horizon. Home had become the threat. The uniform that once shielded her was now a target. Her shoulder ached, her lungs burned, but exhaustion was what scared her. It was the silence in her earpiece, no radio traffic, no pursuit chatter. Hayes was too careful for chaos. If they weren't chasing her, it meant they already knew where she'd go next. She reached a ridge overlooking an old highway, the asphalt cracked and littered with sand. A single truck approached in the distance, headlights dimmed, engine rumbling low. She raised her pistol, steady but uncertain, until the vehicle stopped 30 yards away. A familiar voice broke the stillness. "Still paranoid, I see." Marisa exhaled in disbelief. "Kine." He stepped into the moonlight, unarmed, hands raised slightly. "You run fast for someone who claims to be retired." "Are you alone?" "Yeah," he said, nodding toward the truck. "Hayes thinks I'm still searching the north perimeter. I told her your trail went cold." Marisa kept her weapon raised. "Why would you help me?" "Because," he said quietly, "I've been asking the same questions you have, and the answers keep disappearing." She hesitated, lowering the pistol just a fraction. "You knew about Iron Dusk." "Not everything," he admitted, "but enough to know Hayes isn't who she pretends to be. She's been running off-the-books programs for years, using the base as her testing ground. When I saw her orders tonight, I realized she didn't want to capture you. She wanted to erase you." The words sank like stones. "Then we don't have long." "Get in," Kine said. "We'll move before dawn." They drove in silence for nearly an hour, the road stretching endlessly between black ridges. The truck's old suspension rattled with every bump, but the noise was comforting, something solid amid the uncertainty. Finally, Marisa spoke. "You were there the night of the match. Did she say anything before it started?" Kine frowned. "Yeah, right before you volunteered, she told Brooks, 'Watch how easy it is to wake the sleeping ones.' I thought she was joking." Marisa's chest tightened, trigger phrase. "She used me," she murmured, "turned my instincts into proof of concept." Kine shot her a glance. "Proof of what?" "That soldiers don't need orders when they're programmed to obey themselves." Neither spoke after that. The implications were too heavy. When the first light of dawn broke across the horizon, they pulled off the road near a derelict fuel station. Kine cut the engine. "We can rest here for a bit. No cameras, no comms. The place has been dead since the war games shut it down." Marisa stepped out, stretching her stiff legs. The air smelled of rust and dust. She could hear a loose sign creaking in the wind. Inside the station's small office, she spread the contents of Mason's drive across a cracked counter, maps, files, and encrypted coordinates. "We need to find out where these locations lead." Kine studied one of the maps. "This one's less than 50 miles south, marked R-Site 4, probably another training facility." Marisa shook her head. "Too remote for training, that's a data hub." "How do you know?" "Because I helped build one like it in Kandahar," she said quietly. "If Hayes is running an active network, that's where her backups are stored." Kine nodded slowly. "Then we go there." She looked up at him. "You don't have to follow me into this." "Too late," he said with a wry smile. "They'll come after me once they realize I lied about finding you." For the first time in days, she smiled back, small, tired but real. By mid-morning, they reached the outskirts of R-Site 4. It wasn't a facility. It was a fortress hidden inside a canyon. Concrete walls rose out of the rock, lined with antennas and motion sensors. No flag, no signage, just blank authority. Kine parked the truck behind a ridge. 2 guards at the gate, maybe more inside. Marisa studied the terrain. "We can't go through the front." "I figured." He gestured toward the canyon rim. "There's an old maintenance trail up there. We can drop down near the comm tower." She gave a short nod. "Let's move." They climbed in silence, boots crunching against gravel. The higher they went, the more the wind screamed through the cliffs. Halfway up, Kine muttered, "You ever think we're not supposed to survive this kind of truth?" Marisa didn't answer. Truth had never been safe. At the top, they crawled along the ridge until the comm tower came into view. It pulsed faintly, alive, transmitting. "This is it," she whispered. Kine crouched beside her. "What's the plan?" "I get in, pull the data core, and shut it down remotely. If Hayes loses the network, she loses control of the project. And if she finds us first..." Then we make sure she never uses it again." He gave a short laugh. "You always talk like it's that simple." "It never is," she said and moved. Inside the tower, the air was cold, humming with the low vibration of servers. Marisa slipped through the corridor like a ghost, Kine covering the rear. They found the main terminal room, a wall of blinking drives and cables. "This is it," she said. "Keep watch." She inserted Mason's drive into the console. The system hesitated, then began decrypting automatically. Lines of code scrolled across the screen, followed by audio files, video logs, documents, all stamped Iron Dusk, continued operations. Her stomach twisted as one video loaded automatically. Hayes speaking to a room of officers. "The objective of Iron Dusk is simple. Loyalty is unreliable when tied to memory. We condition identity itself. Remove hesitation, create instinct. The subject believes they chose service, when in truth, service chose them." Kine stared at the screen, jaw tight. "She's insane." Marisa kept copying data to the portable drive. Insane people don't make systems this clean. The download hit 90%. That's when the alarm blared. "Motion sensors," Kine shouted. Red lights flashed across the walls. Automated shutters slammed over the exits. Marisa ripped the drive free and shoved it into her pocket. "They're sealing us in." "Back vent," Kine pointed to a maintenance hatch near the ceiling. He boosted her up, metal groaning under her weight. She crawled through the narrow duct, heart hammering. Behind her, Kine followed. "Go," he urged. "I'll cover you." "No," she hissed. "We go together." But he dropped down instead, turning to face the approaching guards. "You always were bad at following orders." The first shots echoed. Sparks rained from the metal walls. Marisa crawled faster, fighting the panic clawing her chest. "Kine," she called. No answer. She pushed herself harder, finally breaking through a vent that opened onto the outer ridge. She tumbled out, landing hard on the gravel. Pain flared through her shoulder. The canyon below lit up, floodlights, shouts, chaos. She rolled behind a boulder, clutching the drive. Smoke rose from the tower, and she could hear distant gunfire before silence swallowed it all. "Kine," she whispered, but only the wind answered. By the time she reached the truck, Dawn was bleeding over the cliffs. Her hands shook as she turned the key, engine sputtering to life. She drove until the facility disappeared behind the horizon. Every mile hurt, not because of the bruises or the exhaustion, but because every friend she trusted seemed to die for the same thing, truth. She pulled off the road near a dry creek bed, shutting the engine. The world was quiet again. She rested her head against the steering wheel, breathing hard. Then her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost ignored it, then she saw the text. "He's alive. 34 degrees 17 N, 118 degrees 12 W. Don't trust Hayes." Her heart slammed. The coordinates pointed east, toward the mountains, not the base. Whoever sent it knew exactly what she needed most: hope. She tightened her grip on the phone. "Hang on, Kine." She shifted gears and drove. Hours later, she reached the coordinates, a remote outpost half buried in rock. The place looked abandoned, but the faint hum of a generator told a different story. She entered cautiously, pistol raised. A voice came from the shadows. "You found me faster than she expected." She spun, weapon ready. Colonel Hayes stepped into the light. Her expression was calm, almost gentle. "Put the gun down, Sergeant." Marisa's blood ran cold. "Where is he?" Hayes tilted her head. "Who?" "Kine, you took him." The colonel smiled faintly. "He volunteered to stay behind. Someone had to make sure you escaped." Marisa's grip tightened. "Liar." "Truth's a matter of perspective," Hayes said softly, "and you're seeing the wrong side of it. You turned us into experiments." "I saved you," Hayes said. "You were all broken when I found you. Iron Dusk gave you purpose again." You stole our will. Hayes sighed. Free will is a luxury soldiers can't afford. Marisa's hand shook. You killed Mason. Hayes's expression hardened. Mason killed himself trying to undo what he built. Don't make the same mistake. The colonel took a step forward. Give me the drive. Let's end this before more blood gets spilled. Marisa's finger brushed the trigger. You already ended it when you took our choices. Hayes studied her, then smiled sadly. You think you're free, but I can prove otherwise. She raised her radio and said quietly, for honor and base. The words hit Marisa like a physical blow. Her vision blurred, her breath caught. Every nerve screamed in rebellion, the trigger phrase. No, she gasped, fighting the wave of compulsion rising inside her. Hayes's voice was calm, controlled. You see, you're still mine. Marisa dropped to one knee, teeth clenched, sweat dripping down her face. The training, the conditioning, the words, it all came flooding back. But beneath it, something else stirred. Mason's voice in her memory. If she tries to control you again, remember who you are. She forced herself to breathe, slow, steady. Her hands trembled, but her mind cleared. She looked up at Hayes, eyes sharp again. Not anymore. The shot echoed through the canyon. Hours later, when the sun rose over the mountains, the outpost was silent. The wind carried dust across the open doorway. Marisa stood outside, the drive in her hand, her expression unreadable. Behind her, smoke curled from the facility, evidence of everything she'd destroyed. She didn't look back. She walked toward the horizon, every step heavy but certain. The war inside her had ended, even if the world never knew it happened. Because sometimes freedom isn't granted. It's reclaimed. What happens after you win a war no one was supposed to know existed. Marisa Rivera walked along the edge of a quiet desert highway, boots crunching over gravel. The horizon stretched endlessly ahead, the morning sun blurring gold across the sand. Her shadow followed like a loyal ghost, silent, steady, and unrelenting. Behind her, the smoke of the outpost had thinned to a whisper. The wind was already covering the tracks, erasing every sign of the night before. Soon there would be no proof left, no bodies, no files, no traces of Iron Dusk. Just rumors, just her. And that was how it needed to be. The drive Mason had given her felt warm in her palm. She destroyed the facility, yes, but one backup remained. Maybe for answers, maybe for closure. She didn't know which she wanted more. A few miles ahead, an old rest stop came into view, a crumbling diner with sun-faded letters and shattered windows. She pushed the door open and stepped inside. The air was thick with dust and the faint smell of oil. She sat at a booth near the window, set the drive on the table, and pulled out her old military laptop. The system booted slowly. Every sound, the whir of the fan, the faint hum of power, felt like it belonged to another lifetime. When the screen lit up, a single file remained uncorrupted. Last transmission MP4. She clicked it. Mason appeared again, his face pale, tired but alive. If you're seeing this, you survived her. That means the conditioning broke. I didn't think it was possible, but I hoped you'd be the one to do it. Marisa leaned closer, her throat tightening. Iron Dusk was never supposed to be a weapon. It started as a recovery project. Soldiers who couldn't rejoin combat but refused to stop fighting. Hayes changed it, turned healing into control. He paused, glancing away. You were the proof it could have worked the right way, Marisa. You just didn't know it yet. Every time they rewrote your loyalty, your heart fought back. That's why she feared you. That's why she needed you contained. The video flickered. Mason's eyes seemed to find hers through the static. If I'm gone, promise me one thing. Don't spend your life running from what they made you. Be something else. Be the version they couldn't design. Then the screen went black. Marisa sat there for a long time, the silence pressing heavy against her chest. Be the version they couldn't design, she whispered. For the first time in years, she felt tears burning her eyes. Not grief, not regret, release. By afternoon, she buried the drive in the sand behind the diner, marking the spot with a simple metal dog tag, the one Mason had given her years ago before that last mission. Then she walked back to the highway. A pickup truck slowed beside her. The driver, a gray-haired rancher, leaned out the window. "You all right, miss? You're a long way from anywhere." She nodded, "Just heading east." He tilted his head. "You military?" She hesitated, then smiled faintly. "Not anymore." He gestured to the passenger seat. "Hop in. I'm headed that way." She climbed in, setting her bag on the floor. The man drove in silence for a while, country radio crackling softly. "You look like someone carrying heavy stories," he said eventually. Marisa glanced out the window. "Maybe one too many." The man nodded. "Funny thing about stories, they get lighter when you tell them." She smiled softly. "Some are meant to stay quiet." He didn't press. The desert rolled by, endless and forgiving. 2 weeks later, she found herself in a small border town, nothing more than a few motels, a diner, and a mechanic's shop. She paid cash for a room overlooking the mountains and stayed there, letting the noise of the world fade. Days passed in silence. She woke with the sunrise, trained by the riverbed, and sat at night under the stars. There were no orders, no ranks, no missions, just breath and memory. Sometimes she dreamed, Hayes's voice echoing through her mind, Mason's face fading into dust, Kind shouting her name in the distance. But when she woke, she didn't feel fear anymore, just a strange peace. She'd spent years being controlled by command phrases, systems, duty. Now she was learning to command herself. One morning, she walked into town for supplies. The television above the counter was showing a military press conference, Colonel Hayes's photo on the screen, the words "deceased in field accident" flashing beneath it. The anchor spoke about a training mishap at a remote installation. No mention of Iron Dusk, no mention of conditioning, no mention of truth. Marisa watched silently, then paid for her things and left. Outside, the sunlight was harsh. They erased Hayes like they erased everything else. The system cleansed itself, neat and clinical. The machine always did. But what they couldn't erase was her memory, and what she'd become because of it. Later that day, she sat by the riverbank, watching the water slide over smooth stones. Her reflection looked different now, older, leaner, eyes sharper but calmer. She thought about Mason, about Kind, about all the soldiers who'd never made it out of the fog. And she thought about the moment it had all started, when the general asked for a volunteer. That simple call had changed everything. Not because she'd stepped forward, but because she'd learned what it meant to step for herself. Maybe that was the real purpose beneath all the manipulation, all the betrayal, to teach her that obedience without choice is hollow, but conviction born from defiance, that's something no one can program. As the sun began to set, a familiar sound echoed faintly down the valley, the distant hum of a helicopter. She looked up, shielding her eyes. The aircraft circled once, then turned west, disappearing over the ridge. For a second her body tensed, reflex, instinct. Then she let it go. No one was coming for her anymore. She vanished from their system, not because she hid, but because she stopped belonging to it. The wind carried dust over the riverbank, scattering dry leaves around her boots. She closed her eyes and let the air move through her hair, whispering across the scars she no longer tried to hide. There was a quiet strength in stillness. She smiled to herself, small and private. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Weeks later, a letter arrived at a military postal hub in Nevada. No return address, just a plain envelope marked for command review. Inside was a single flash drive, encrypted. When analysts opened it, they found the complete archive of Operation Iron Dusk, uncorrupted, unredacted, undeniable. The file's metadata listed its origin as unknown. Attached was a note typed simply, "Every soldier deserves to choose who they are." MR. The report went up the chain of command, sparking quiet investigations, closed hearings, quiet resignations. Nothing reached the public, but inside the ranks, stories began to circulate about a rogue sergeant who exposed something buried too deep to name. Some said she'd gone mercenary. Some said she'd vanished across the border. Others said she was still out there, watching the ones who tried to rebuild what she destroyed. No one could prove any of it. And that's how she wanted it. Months later, deep in the mountains, a group of new recruits trained at a civilian survival school. The instructor was quiet, calm, unassuming, a woman who spoke little but whose eyes carried weight. "Out here," she told them, "you learn fast. The mission isn't about orders, it's about judgment." A young recruit raised his hand. "Were you ever in the service, ma'am?" She smiled faintly, something like that. He grinned. "Did you ever win any fights?" The question made her laugh softly. "One or two." She turned toward the mountains, her voice lowering. "But the hardest ones weren't against enemies." The recruits watched her curiously, waiting for the rest. "They were against who I used to be," she said finally. Then she nodded toward the trail. "All right, let's move." The group followed her into the trees, their chatter fading into the wind. And as the sunlight broke through the branches, MARISA RIVERA walked at the front. No rank, no insignia, no chains. Just a soldier who had once been programmed to obey, now teaching others how to think. That night, when the campfire burned low and the stars came out, she sat alone on a ridge overlooking the valley. The wind carried the scent of pine and ash. She took out her dog tags, the only thing she'd kept from her old life, and held them over the flames for a long moment. Then she let them fall. The metal hissed softly, swallowed by fire. She didn't need proof anymore. Only peace. Far away in a locked government archive, the Iron Dusk file blinked in quiet storage, sealed but never forgotten. Somewhere in its final line, the system recorded an update. Subject RIVERA MARISA. Status unknown. Note, no further pursuit recommended. The world kept turning. Soldiers came and went, missions changed, wars began and ended. But sometimes, late at night, someone in a distant command post would see an unmarked report land in their inbox. Intel clean, precise, anonymous, always signed with the same initials. MR. And those who knew the name would pause for a moment, reading between the lines. Because they understood something most never would. Freedom isn't silence. It's the courage to speak when no one expects you to. And in that unseen war, the one fought not on battlefields, but within the hearts of those who once obeyed without question, MARISA RIVERA was still winning. Final moral/closing voiceover line. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And when it does, the world remembers even if history doesn't.